lobbyists applying intense pressure,
If you don't do it, people will go elsewhere.
property developers donating tens of thousands of dollars to politicians' campaigns.
Wait, are you seeing this?
Take a look at this. The biggest land developers bypassing the $1,200 campaign contribution limit by having everyone in their families give the maximum amount.
What?
Farmland being bulldozed without a second thought as to how we'll legitimately feed ourselves in the near future. Urban growth boundaries being pushed to expand by 4 times the assessed need.
We heard it here tonight too. Like, once you give something, you really can't take it back.
What is happening here? And why should you even care? Well, this is what's happening in my city, and it's probably happened in your city and will continue to eat away at your wallet in the form of ever-increasing property taxes, rent costs, traffic congestion, and car-centric city development. This video will affect your bank account and your life. We've done the research so that you don't have to. And I'm about to teach you how to prevent your property taxes from going up drastically so that you can save more of your hard-earned money and make the city that you live in a better place for everyone.
A big win for developers today at the city's planning committee meeting.
See, your property taxes are going up this year, next year, and every year after that probably. But at the same time, most cities in North America are also going broke and not knowing it.
The city may overestimate the need for new developable land for housing as it updates the urban growth boundary.
The amount of these property tax increases depends on the choices that your city makes. And you, as a co-owner of the city, because that's what you are, you need to know about this. We're going to use London, Ontario, the city that I live in here, as a case study, but the lessons that we learn along the way will most likely apply to you and your city. So let's do this.
The overall concept is that, and we always go by, is that growth is paying for growth. So whatever development concept that is developed or urban growth boundary expansion that's developed would need to be funded through those development charges moving forward.
I'm going to condense everything you need to know about how the City of London is planning on dramatically expanding its urban growth boundary to align with the expectations of land developers. See, the public has been led to believe that this will get more homes built.
If you don't do it, people will go elsewhere on farmland.
But freeing up a bunch of land like this won't actually get the right type of homes built and doesn't address the root causes of housing affordability and the housing supply issues. Whether you are a renter or a homeowner, and no matter where you live, this video will help you understand how expanding urban growth boundaries costs everyone more than just property taxes. Before we delve into the timeline of our specific case study here in London, we all need to understand what an urban growth boundary is in the first place and why they're incredibly important for people and cities everywhere. And if I say UGB throughout this video, I mean urban growth boundary, UGB, UGB, urban growth boundary, which is an agreed upon line that's drawn on a map and periodically updated to indicate where zoning can and cannot allow for land to be developed into new uses, such as residential and commercial and industrial. In the old days, development just sort of happened wherever people wanted to build until government stepped in, especially in Canada, and implemented planning approaches to ensure that growth was sustainable and made practical sense for the long term. Urban growth boundaries are planning tools used by municipalities, so most of the time cities, counties, and other regional government bodies to manage growth pressure and ideally limit urban sprawl. Most development is not allowed to go outside of the urban growth boundary. Here in Ontario, Canada, these UGBs are regulated by the provincial government. I need to cover this real quick too. There is a huge financial incentive for landowners to have their property move from outside to inside an urban growth boundary, which is usually a political decision which allows for it to be zoned for development. For example, a consultant's report from London last year estimated land values to increase 5.5 to 8 times higher than their original value when moved within the urban growth boundary.
Raw land prices increased 5.5 to 8 times their original value.
Imagine you bought a big piece of land for, let's say, $1 million, and a single decision by your local government could raise that to $8 million overnight with no obligation to actually build anything on it. So now that you know what the heck a UGB is and why they're incredibly important, let's get to our case study of the city that I live in, London, Ontario. This should help you understand why It's so easy for cities and councils and the public to push for expansion without knowing the true costs associated with those decisions. So let's break down the timeline. London's been working towards updating its urban growth boundary over the past couple of years as part of a review of its official plan. In June of 2024, city staff provided London City Council with a recommendation to expand the UGB by a total of 450 hectares, or 1,468 American football fields worth of land. Now, somehow, between June and December, this evolved into council pushing for 2,000 hectares of land, or 6,524 American football fields worth of land, to be authorized by the province.
Just to kind of give in context, what does 2,000 hectares look like?
So 2,000 hectares is a substantial amount of land. I'll just give maybe from a context perspective that if you took the area that was bounded by Fanshawe Park Road to the south, north by Sunningdale, Adelaide to the east, and Richmond to the west, that's approximately 340 hectares. So if you're looking at 2,000, that is approximately 6, almost 7 times that type of an area.
However, the government of Ontario, so the province, pushed back and said absolutely not, since the province requires municipalities to use an actual planning process and not just market-based speculation.
We were last before you in June. That's where we were given the direction for further engagement. And we also were asked to undertake a housing supply marketplace analysis. Also during this time, the province finalized a new provincial planning statement and also revised and provided 2024 Ministry of Finance population projections. These revised projections have been used to develop our recommendations that you see today.
That process for London indicated 1,475 hectares, or 4,814 American football fields worth of land, to be required for future land needs and no more. That's what council settled on, the absolute most amount of land grab that they could get away with. I chatted with various inside sources who wish to remain anonymous and heard that a few things have changed since the beginning of the planning stages. So let's go over those. Instead of aiming for 25 years of growth planning, council amended the time horizon to be extended to 30 years to justify more land. Not because they won't be able to free up more land over the next 30 years, they just wanted it all to be made developable now for some reason. Initial density assumptions were revised to make way for a higher ratio of low-density residential units, aka LDR, and often in the form of the stereotypical single-family dwelling, houses. And those changes to the LDR density and ratios significantly altered the land needs from that initial 450 hectares in June 2024 to 1,200 hectares in December 2024. Recommended by staff. Might add actually only senior staff, not the lower levels of staff. And 200 hectares were removed from supply due to flood mapping and uncertainty in the Dingman Creek area, meaning those lands may not be ultimately developable. Developable. Got it. And so those 200 hectares were made up elsewhere as part of the 1,475 hectares. The weird thing is that council is currently in the middle of budget deliberations, trying to cut as many costs as possible, because we, as a city, currently cannot maintain what is already inside of our current growth boundary, our current UGB. The good news is that there's limited appetite in cutting services, either from inside the city or from agencies that it funds. But cutting of services is often what happens in other cities, most notably in the United States. By the way, the reason that I'm saying we when I'm talking about my city of London, Canada, it's because of something that Mitch said on one of my recent podcasts.
Wow, that's such a good question. As the co-owner of your city, which is what you are, you're not a customer of your city, you're a co-owner of it. As the co-owner, it's your responsibility to understand how it's doing financially. And it's important because how your city is doing financially is sort of the connective tissue about all the other things you care about. So whether that's transportation or pools or parks or trees, municipal finance is kind of like that connective tissue that brings it all together.
We're all co-owners of our cities. We're part of the cities that we live, work, and thrive in. Anyway, I hope Londoners enjoy even more potholes and bumpy roads because council is considering reducing the budget for the annual local road reconstruction program by $11 million.
2 weeks ago, council asked staff to prepare business cases for possible service cuts valued at $750,000. The maximum savings for an average home would have been just $4, though. Council has now expanded the list to include 3 bigger budget items: green bin collection at high-rises, blue box collection from small businesses, and reducing road reconstruction.
And they're down to the last few strings that they can really pull as they struggle to bring that tax bill down. Of course we need more housing, but if council's already trying unsuccessfully to cut corners to get property tax increases down to a 5% increase, then expanding the UGB means that London will have even more sprawl to maintain, making the problem even worse. If we can't afford what we have now, then we can't afford to expand either. It should be as simple as that, but we'll get into some of the complexities later in the video, like who's benefiting from these expansions. Well, we actually did do some investigating and cross-referenced public election campaign finance records to companies that really wanted the ear of certain key politicians. So yeah, we found out who's pulling council's strings. Stick with me throughout the video to find out more. Before we move along, the whole point in me making this video is so that I hope you learn a few things that will make you a more educated voter at a municipal level, as well as provincial or state and federal. Because who knows, maybe you'll feel so informed and so empowered by listening to this and knowing more that you'll write council with your own thoughts. And if you feel like that, please do, because at the local, city, municipal levels, that's where your voice can actually be heard. Like provincial, state, federal, they're really big. They're pretty much too big for any of the big guys to hear you as a citizen. But you can make a difference at a local, municipal, government, politics level. That is why all of this is so important to know about, because this is your everyday life. Municipal politics, pretty interesting, actually. Now it's time to talk issues. There are a bunch of conflicting issues converging on the City of London at this time. Pressure is coming from everyone and everywhere, especially for more housing. Constraints on the city's revenue streams, massive growth of the city's costs and liabilities, all the while land developers, which are corporations that exist purely to maximize profits, are saying the right things and leveraging the public pressure to push past logic and reasoning, stating that their hammer, their tool for the job, which is developing, is the right tool for the job here. All this and a few more twists and turns along the way that we'll get into once you have a grasp of the terminology that we all need to know. First up, pressure. London is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada, and with a population exceeding 540,000 as of the most recent 2021 census, which makes the city the 11th largest city in Canada. 2, I am pretty sure everyone is aware that just like everywhere in Canada, there is a housing crisis in London as well, and there is pressure on the city to build more houses quickly. But this terminology is actually flawed across the world with the housing crisis. So I'll fix it right now for the rest of the video as well. Homes don't always have to be houses. They could be apartments and duplexes and triplexes and townhomes and courtyard apartments and laneway houses. Houses aren't and can't be the only type of home that exists. They're just such a small part of the whole picture of homes for people. So when we say housing crisis, it's kind of disingenuous. The housing crisis is not just about houses. The crisis stems from how society and elected officials have, for decades, mismanaged resources and regulations of industries that are involved in building homes and ensuring existing homes can be filled by people who need them. Everything from trades workers to zoning policy to rent control to the cost of construction materials. It goes pretty deep. But the London Plan, the official plan of our city, which is ratified by council and approved by the province, recommends the opposite of all of this, building inwards and upwards instead of outwards and sprawling. Up next, we're going to look at development charges. In 2022, the province of Ontario, in its efforts to deal with the housing crisis, gave exemptions to land developers to incentivize them to build more homes. These exemptions mean that the land developers now don't have to pay cities the development charges that they normally would have to pay on new construction projects to fund the cost of infrastructure such as roads and sewers. This exemption was good news for land developers, but bad news for cities and the residents of those cities, which saw a major source of revenue for infrastructure dry up. And as a result, they had to backfill their budgets to make up the difference. Oh, actually, one moment. I'm hearing right now that we have breaking news, and that is that in the middle of writing this script, the mayor announced that his lobbying efforts were successful. The province just ruled that cities don't have to backfill their budgets after all, resulting in a $10 million savings for London's 2026 budget. That's good, right? Well, on the surface, yeah. But digging just a little bit past the headlines, not really. Not in the long run. This is an issue for another video, but it's actually the fault of the province for putting the burden on municipalities on the current tax basis to cover the costs of the development charges instead of the land developers. Make that make sense to me. I can see where they were coming from, but it also just doesn't make sense. Anyway, London's mayor said he expects provincial and federal programs will help to cover future infrastructure costs. That one word has me worried. He expects provincial and federal levels of government to help cover what land developers normally pay. But the province already said, nah, you guys don't need to pay that. So it's weird. The funding shortfall didn't just go away. It's just being kicked down the road. Eventually the bill will come due, and we're still paying for it, just through a different vehicle. No pun intended. Speaking of DCs, or development charges, next comes the city revenues part of this video. Soon you'll understand why what I was just talking about is not the greatest for long-term growth. From a revenue perspective, cities use the revenue from new developments now to fund its current liabilities. These are named development charges. But we've got to note that these development charges typically come from land developers who build on city land, whether it's inside or outside of the current urban growth boundary. If development occurs inside the UGB, the city receives development fees from the developers. But costs to the city don't go up as much because the infrastructure is largely already in place. This is good. However, if the city extends the UGB and then the developers build on that land, the city still does receive development fees from the developers, but it also costs the city more because of the infrastructure like sewer lines and wastewater treatment plant capacity upgrades, which are not already in place that need to be extended. Too much of this is bad, unfortunately. So then we get to the costs. The City of London is currently working very hard to cut costs wherever it can to lower property tax increases for 2026 and 2027. Already mentioned that. Good. Great. That's going to be difficult, though, as it's already resulting in decisions like cutting costs to projects that keep its roadways from becoming as bumpy and torn up as Costa Rica's are. Side note, we were just honeymooning in Costa Rica and had a great time in our tiny little car, just two-wheel drive, with no need for a massive pickup truck that every other tourist was driving because they thought that they needed them.
This car right here is a two-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive, and we have successfully gotten to where we are now in it. These are technically public roads still, they just happen to be very ill-maintained.
I mean, not to pick on Costa Rica, it's still wonderful. I'm just stating facts. The roads are in disrepair. Quick side note here to add on to my pickup truck comment. If you think that we as a society, or even just as a city, can just buy larger vehicles to deal with the progressively worse road conditions, we can't. Large, heavy vehicles like massive pickup trucks do massively more damage to roads than smaller, lighter vehicles. Not to mention horrible damage to humans in collisions when they happen. And the absolutely atrocious sightlines. If we go down this endless loop, we quickly run into the problem that Texas has, where because the roadways are in such disrepair, people buy bigger and bigger trucks. In turn, those trucks cause more and more damage to the roads that are already falling apart and at a faster and faster rate. But this topic is for a whole other video. Back to urban growth boundaries. The City of London faces pressure from all sides, from nonprofits, special interest groups, developers, advocates for those without homes, and the public in general to build more homes and do it faster. They're also under pressure from both the federal and provincial governments to build more homes. Again, build more homes and do it faster. Everyone's saying that. Recent reports indicate that the majority of the city's stock of affordable housing units are in poor repair, and with very few of them in good and very good conditions. Most are in the poor repair category. Unfortunately, it will cost a fortune to repair them all. And there is no funding for that because these are unfunded liabilities. Unfunded liabilities are the financial obligations a government, company, or a pension plan has committed to, but for which it has not set aside sufficient funds to cover those obligations. Certain councillors and sources say that restricting London's growth may push development to towns, resulting in farmland loss, increased commute distances, and even more traffic. This is sometimes referred to leapfrog development or exurban sprawl. But to counter this argument, I talked with some city staff and found that London captures 84% of the census metropolitan area, or CMA, growth, according to StatsCan. Leapfrog development never really materialized due to provincial growth framework binding all municipalities, risk of race to the bottom if one municipality loosens rules, and how Ontario is unlike the United States because they often don't have growth boundaries, which leads to infinite sprawl. Not good. A little bit more controlled here in at least Ontario, Canada. And at the same time, recent reports indicate that suburban infrastructure that was built around 30 years ago is now at the end of its lifespan, which means more prior commitments, also known as more unfunded liabilities, which also means more construction. Everyone loves more construction, right? If you're ever wondering why everything's always under construction, it's because of, oftentimes, sprawl. Just a lot of infrastructure to be worked on, which causes... Anyways, that's a whole other topic. And at the same time, the much older infrastructure in the city's core needs upgrading to accommodate infill, like upgrading wastewater treatment plants, new water and sewer lines in the downtown. So even more unfunded liabilities. And I'm not even saying that tall sprawl is the tool for the job either. Listen, we need to work on developing the missing middle, but that can only be done with better zoning laws. Or at least not single-family zoning. I won't dive into that here, but look up the missing middle if that's piqued your interest at all. It's basically apartments, single-family dwellings. Missing middle is everything else pretty much. All the things that are mostly banned in most places in North America. Now time to move on to the next section. Land developers. We all probably have an idea of what they are, but let's all get on the same page for this. A land developer is an individual, company, or an organization that buys land and develops it for commercial, residential, industrial, some sort of use. They're responsible for the entire development process, from initial planning and zoning approvals to construction and marketing. Essentially, they transform undeveloped land into valuable income-generating property. It's also important to note the difference between developers, who often own the land and secure financing for new developments, and the actual builders that oversee construction of buildings and neighborhoods. There's kind of 4 phases to their process. Acquisition and planning, where land developers purchase land, often in greenfield, and then conduct feasibility studies to determine its suitability for development. This includes assessing zoning regulations, potential environmental concerns, and market demand. Then there's infrastructure and construction, where they're responsible for creating the necessary infrastructure such as roads, utilities, and landscaping to make the land ready for building. This can involve obtaining permits and working with the contractors and managing construction projects. And finally, the part that most people are familiar with, marketing and sales. Once the development is finally completed, typically after many years, land developers market and sell or lease the finished properties. This can involve residential homes, commercial buildings, industrial spaces, or mixed-use developments, or more probably. With all of that effort comes both financial risk and financial rewards. Land developers often take on significant financial risks, investing capital and managing projects from beginning to end. But successful development can yield substantial profits, making them a high-risk, high-reward business. Now that we're on the same page about all of that, we can talk about land developers here in London. The private land developers are looking to jump in as the solution. Now, to make the land developers' lives easier, they're pushing greenfield development sites. So previously undeveloped sites for residential and commercial and industrial development outside of the urban growth boundary. These sites look like this on a map, but really they look like this in person. This right here is nature. Also agriculture. Soon to be a parking lot, pretty much. Also, look, as much as I love nature because, we need it to sustain life on this freaking rock that's hurling through the infinite void that we call space at 107,000 kilometers per hour, well over any speed limit within cities. I also understand that we need more homes and we need to build them faster, but we don't need to sprawl in order to do that. The land developers who own this land previously acquired it in order to profit from it in the future by developing it. Corporations exist to maximize profits, so it makes sense that they're pushing for development, whether inside or outside of the urban growth boundary. But if they build inside the UGB on land they currently own, they pay development fees while making a profit. If the city expands the UGB, the value of their land being moved from outside to inside the UGB will go up exponentially in value, and they will make more profits. There is a lot of incentive to lobby politicians to expand the UGB. Just kind of a fact there. All of that in a vacuum doesn't necessarily mean that developers are actively lobbying our councillors, but there are some other things that kind of signify that pretty strongly. Did you know that nearly $40,000 were donated to certain city councillors' election campaigns back in 2022 by developers who applied for land they owned to be moved inside the urban growth boundary? All of this information is available through the campaign finance disclosures on the city's website. But parsing it took some help from some friends who don't actually want to be mentioned in this video because this is a little bit of a hot take, even though this video is logical and fact-based. I'll link the read-only version of this spreadsheet in the description for your reference. You'll see that we broke it down into 4 subtabs within the sheet. So there's the original data sources and then breakdowns into categories. So sorted by property, sorted by councillor, sorted by applicant. The councillors who received the greatest financial backing from landowner applicants were Sean Lewis, Paul Van Meerbergen, and Steve Lehman, all of whom have been heavily involved in the City of London's Planning and Environment Committee that rubber stamps approvals for planning applications. And don't forget the $26,200 that was donated to Mayor Josh Morgan's campaign. This is concerning because unlike most other major cities in Ontario, London does not have a lobbyist registry, so it's impossible for the public to know since the last election who our elected representatives have been meeting with, the nature and purpose of those meetings, and ways that the developers are influencing decisions of council that directly impact their financial interests. Wow. You can guess which councillors were opposed to creating a lobbyist registry when the idea was raised back in 2023, though. As you can see in the screenshot, Lewis, Van Meerbergen, and Lehman, among others, voted nay to creating a lobbyist registry. That's a whole other sort of video to dive into, though. And that's not for right now. Whew! Okay, now that we have all of that out of the way, do you remember when I said this just a few minutes ago? As much as I love nature because, we need it to sustain life on this freaking rock that's hurling through the infinite void that we call space, I also understand that we need more homes and we need to build them faster, but we don't need to sprawl in order to do that. I want to talk about that a bit more for a second because as the world burns and we're still trying to live on it, which includes putting food in our mouths to sustain the meat on our bones, the land surrounding London London, Ontario is classified as prime agricultural land. That's some of the best land in the world for growing food, and that arable land that is capable of being cultivated for growing crops, is shrinking every year. And can you guess why? I mean, it's obvious because we've been talking about it for the entire video so far. Shrinking arable land is primarily due to the conversion to urban development. People might say, and I know they totally do because I've addressed it in previous videos, that Canada is a huge country, so why can't we just grow food elsewhere in like someplace else in Canada? Because the soil conditions necessary for agriculture do not exist elsewhere, say in the northern parts of Ontario or northern parts of Canada. It took many thousands of years and movement of literal glaciers to establish the soil conditions now found in southwestern Ontario. Everything is starting to hopefully now make sense. Almost. Because this next part is weird. In Ontario, municipalities have to meet provincially required targets for minimum amounts of land they plan to convert to urban development. Hence, land needs assessments and stuff like that. And yet, there is no comparable assessment of how much agricultural land in Ontario, or Canada for that matter, needs to preserve in order to feed current and future generations of humans, of people like us. Like this, what? Oh, this is so backwards. This is especially important to keep in mind as global supply chains for food production are becoming more unstable due to climate change and mass displacement, climate refugees, and geopolitical factors like tariffs. You might have heard of those recently, and growing food insecurity in our region. Question we should ask our land use planners is what the minimum amount of land that we would need to be able to feed our growing population in an event that we could no longer depend on international imports. Are we asking that? No. We're asking how much can we develop of our very valuable farmland? Oh my God, it's sad. With all of that said, I think I should probably do a video on this massive agricultural ticking time bomb that's sitting in plain sight yet has been forever ignored. Now, I specifically promised you at the beginning of this video to teach you how to prevent your property taxes from going up drastically so that you can save more of your hard-earned money and make your city a better place to live in. The first step was to learn all about this, everything in the video. If you've made it this far, then you've done that. The next steps will be slightly different depending on where you live in the world. But the gist is this. Get involved locally. Start learning and understanding how your city works in particular. Figure out how decisions get made. Reach out to others in your community who get involved in this stuff way more often than you do, potentially. You can find the ones that really know what's going on by showing up to council meetings. Reach out to your councillors and ask questions. Either go to town halls that your ward councillor conducts or write them to get them to host one. If there's something you like or don't like or would like to see changed, then write your city, write your councillor. Just get out there and start talking to people. Even if you're talking to the wrong person at first, you'll quickly learn the ins and outs of the systems which make your community, your city, your town, all of that function. I could go on with the hows, but honestly, if you just start understanding all of this, you'll be able to start moving towards preventing your city from making decisions that increase your property taxes drastically. And again, if you're still here, then you may in fact be an urbanist in disguise. Or you already are, you already know it, but you'll probably want to check out these YouTube channels like Strong Towns and Not Just Bikes and Climate Town and City Beautiful. Those are all wonderful channels and they have hundreds of hours, dare I say, of content that will educate the absolute heck out of you and change your world. They're great at conveying the extreme complexities of our cities. And they will uncover what's in front of you. You'll never see the world the same again once you start watching this type of content. And you know how I've been talking about cities going broke in this video? Well, I also previously made a video right here that's about how essentially everyone you know is secretly broke. You'll obviously also want to subscribe for more content like this, maybe share this video with your city councilor, maybe with friends and family, everyone you know. Let me know what you think in the comments and check out my Patreon for early access videos, behind the scenes content, and more. All right, see ya, bye.